Boutique Fantasia, $850. That can't be right. Let this work.
Hello, my dear friends, and welcome back to Voices of Auntie Sandra. I've always believed that there is good in everyone, that kindness is a language we all understand. But the story I'm about to share with you today is a chilling reminder that sometimes the most monstrous evil hides behind the sweetest smile. I always believed in the kindness of strangers, until that kindness nearly killed me. This is the story of Margaret Hale, a woman whose golden years were almost stolen from her by a wolf in sheep's clothing. So pour yourself a cup of tea, get comfortable, and listen closely to a tale of trust, betrayal, and the incredible strength it takes to fight back when the world sees you as just a frail old woman. Let's begin. My name is Margaret Hale, and for 76 years I've called Wimberley, Texas, my home. It's one of those hill country towns where the cypress trees dip their knees into the Blanco River and the summer heat settles over you like a weighted blanket. It's a place where everyone knows your name, your business, and what you brought to the church potluck last Sunday. For most of my life, that sense of community was a comfort. Now it just felt like a constant reminder of who was missing. The silence in my little ranch-style house became my most frequent companion after my Robert passed. 50 years we'd had together. 50 years of his booming laugh echoing off these walls, the scent of his Old Spice in the hallway, the reassuring weight of his hand on my shoulder. Now the silence was so loud it hummed. It was in the empty space beside me in our bed, in the second coffee cup that remained unwashed on the shelf, and in the old leather armchair in the living room that no one sat in anymore. Robert was the sturdy oak tree in the garden of my life. I was the climbing rose that had wrapped around him for so long I wasn't sure I could stand on my own. My days fell into a quiet, predictable rhythm. I'd tend to my roses, their velvet petals a small joy in the sea of gray. I'd host my book club on Tuesdays, where we'd spend more time gossiping about the new mayor than discussing the actual book. I'd walk down to the Blue Hole in the early mornings, when the mist was still rising off the water, and talk to Robert as if he were walking right beside me. "The azaleas are finally blooming, dear," I'd whisper to the breeze. "You'd have loved to see them this year." My children, bless their hearts, worried. Linda, my daughter, lived up in Dallas, tangled in the busy life of a real estate agent with 2 teenagers of her own. She'd call every night, her voice a frantic buzz of concern. "Are you eating right, Mom? Did you remember to take your blood pressure medicine? Are you lonely?" Mark, my son, was a lawyer down in Houston. He was the practical one, the pragmatist. His calls were less frequent but more direct. "Mom, you need a system, a routine. Have you considered moving into one of those assisted living communities? They have activities. People your own age." I'd always politely decline. This house wasn't just wood and nails. It was a museum of my life. Every scuff on the hardwood floor was a memory. Mark taking his first steps, Linda spilling a can of paint during a teenage craft project. Robert and I had built this life within these walls. Leaving it felt like a betrayal. I was a retired first-grade teacher. I'd spent my entire career managing classrooms of 30 energetic 6-year-olds. Surely I could manage myself. But the body has a funny way of disagreeing with the mind. It happened on a Wednesday. I was reaching for my favorite watering can on the top shelf of the garden shed. I'd done it 1,000 times before, but this time, a sudden wave of dizziness washed over me. The world tilted, a kaleidoscope of green and brown. The next thing I knew, a sharp, searing pain shot up my left arm. I was on the concrete floor, staring up at a spiderweb I'd been meaning to sweep away for weeks, a broken wrist and a bruised hip. That was the official diagnosis. But the doctor's unofficial diagnosis, delivered with a stern look over his spectacles, was, "You can't live alone like this anymore, Margaret." That fall was the catalyst. Linda drove down from Dallas in a panic, her face etched with a mixture of fear and guilt. She tidied the house with a frantic energy, restocking my pantry and fluffing pillows as if that could somehow mend my broken bone. "We need to get you some help, Mom," she said, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "Just for a few months. Someone to help with the cooking, the driving, making sure you take your medication on time." I don't want a stranger in my house, I protested, my voice weaker than I intended. It won't be a stranger, she said, her tone softening. I spoke to Pastor John at the community church. He knows a young woman, an absolute angel, he said. Her name is Emily Carter. She volunteers all the time, helps with the elderly. Everyone adores her. An angel. The word sounded so reassuring. In a small town like Wimberley, a recommendation from the pastor was as good as gold. It was a seal of approval from God himself. It bypassed the cold, impersonal process of going through an agency, of interviews and background checks. This was community. This was trust. I was tired. The pain in my wrist was a dull, constant throb, and the loneliness felt heavier than ever. Maybe Linda was right. Maybe a little help wouldn't be so bad. A friendly face to break up the long, silent afternoons. All right, dear, I finally conceded. If Pastor John trusts her, then so will I. I still remember the relief that washed over Linda's face. She believed she had found the perfect solution, a way to care for her mother from 200 miles away. She thought she was bringing an angel into my home. We were both so wrong. By opening my door to a helper recommended by our church, a woman the entire town vouched for, I wasn't just getting help for a broken wrist. I was welcoming a monster, and I had handed her the keys myself. 2 days later, Emily Carter arrived on my doorstep. She was exactly as Pastor John had described, and then some. She wasn't just pretty, she radiated a kind of wholesome, sun-drenched goodness you'd expect to see on a church pamphlet. She was young, maybe 28, with honey blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and eyes the color of a clear summer sky. Her smile was the first thing you noticed, wide, genuine, and instantly disarming. She carried a basket containing a jar of homemade chicken noodle soup and a loaf of freshly baked sourdough. Mrs. Hale, she said, her voice soft and melodic. It is such an honor to meet you. Pastor John speaks so highly of you. I brought you a little something. My mother always said soup is good for the soul and for a healing bone. I was charmed before she even stepped over the threshold. All my reservations about having a stranger in my home seemed to melt away under the warmth of that smile. She moved with a quiet efficiency that was both impressive and soothing. Within the first hour, she had assessed my kitchen, learned where everything was, and was gently helping me to the dinner table with a bowl of her delicious soup. She wasn't just a helper, she was a companion. She'd listen, truly listen, as I told her stories about Robert and my years as a teacher. She'd ask thoughtful questions, her blue eyes fixed on mine with unwavering attention. She'd read to me from the newspaper, her voice never tiring. She organized my pill box with the precision of a pharmacist and would place my medication in my hand with a glass of water, right on schedule, never forgetting. She was a breath of fresh air in the stale, silent house. For the first time since Robert's passing, the loneliness began to recede. This, I thought with a deep sense of relief, was a blessing. Linda had been right. The phone call from Mark came on a Saturday afternoon. I was in my armchair, a blanket tucked over my legs, while Emily was humming a hymn and polishing Robert's old silver picture frames, something I hadn't had the heart to do myself. "I want to see her, Mom," Mark said, his lawyerly tone cutting straight to the point. "Put her on a video call." "Mark, don't be silly, you don't need to interrogate the poor girl," I chuckled. "Humor me," he insisted. I sighed and motioned for Emily. "My son, Mark, would like to say hello. He's a bit of a mother hen." Emily's face broke into another one of her radiant smiles. "Of course! How wonderful to meet you, Mark." She took the tablet from me, her movements graceful. I could see Mark's face on the screen, his expression unreadable, his eyes narrowed in concentration. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Emily," he said, his voice polite but lacking warmth. "My mother says you're taking wonderful care of her." "She's a joy to be with, truly," Emily replied, her voice as sweet as honey. "I'm just happy I can help out." "My sister mentioned you were recommended by the church. Have you worked with many other families in Wimberley?" he asked. It sounded like a casual question, but I knew my son. He was cross-examining her. Emily didn't falter. "Oh, a few here and there. I help out wherever I'm needed. It's my calling, I suppose. The Lord asks us to care for our elders, and it's a privilege to do so." "Do you have any formal medical training? A nursing assistant certificate, perhaps?" Her smile remained perfectly in place. I took some courses a few years back, but honestly, I find that a caring heart is the best qualification. Don't you agree? She tilted her head, a picture of innocence. The conversation went on like that for another 5 minutes. Mark would ask a precise, probing question, and Emily would return it with a sweet, folksy, and utterly unimpeachable answer that made his questions seem almost rude. She was flawless. Perfect. After he'd hung up, Emily handed the tablet back to me. "Your son is very protective of you," she said warmly. "You're very lucky to have him." Then she went back to her polishing, humming her hymn as if nothing had happened. A few hours later, Mark called back. Emily was out in the garden, picking some fresh mint for tea. "Mom," he began, his voice low and urgent. "Fire her." I was so stunned I nearly dropped the phone. "What? Mark, what on earth are you talking about? She's an absolute angel." "No, she's not," he countered, his voice sharp. "She's a performer. Every single one of her answers was too polished, too perfect. It was like she was reading from a script. The loving caregiver, the devout Christian. It's an act." "You're being ridiculous," I scoffed, a wave of indignation rising in me. "You're a lawyer, Mark. You spend your days looking for the worst in people. You don't know the first thing about her. Pastor John recommended her. I don't care who recommended her. Did you see her eyes? When she was talking to me, that smile never reached her eyes. They were like blue glass. Cold. There's something wrong with that woman, Mom. I'm telling you, my gut is screaming at me." His words were meant to be a warning, but they felt like an attack. An attack on my judgment, on Pastor John's judgment, on this entire community. Emily had brought light and warmth back into my home, and Mark, from his glass tower in Houston, wanted to snatch it away based on nothing more than a lawyer's cynical hunch. "Your gut is not a reliable source of information," I said, my voice clipped. "Emily is kind, respectful, and incredibly helpful. I haven't felt this cared for in a very long time. I forbid you from speaking about her this way. She is a blessing." There was a long, frustrated sigh on the other end of the line. "Mom, please, just be careful. Don't let her handle your finances. Don't let her manage your prescriptions on her own. Just promise me you'll be careful." "I am a grown woman, Mark. I don't need my son telling me how to manage my own home," I snapped, feeling a pang of guilt even as I said it. "I have to go. Emily is bringing in the tea." I hung up before he could argue further. My hand was trembling slightly, a mix of anger and hurt. I looked out the window. Emily was walking up the path, her face serene, holding a small bouquet of mint leaves. She looked up, saw me, and gave me that bright, angelic smile. How could my son, my own flesh and blood, be so terribly wrong about someone so obviously good? I pushed his warning aside, burying it deep. It was just Mark being Mark, overprotective, suspicious, and cynical. I was the one here. I could see the truth with my own eyes, and the truth was, Emily Carter was perfect. Too perfect. The weeks that followed my tense phone call with Mark were, I have to admit, some of the most peaceful I had experienced since Robert's death. I pushed my son's dark warnings into a dusty corner of my mind, labeling them as the product of a lawyer's paranoid imagination. The evidence of my own eyes was too compelling. Emily Carter was not a performer. She was a miracle. Our days settled into a rhythm that was as comforting as a lullaby. Emily would wake with the sun, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and toasted sourdough would drift into my bedroom, a gentle summons to a new day. She'd help me with my morning stretches, her hands strong but gentle on my frail arms, encouraging me to do just a little more each time. My wrist healed, the cast came off, but Emily's presence had become indispensable. She wasn't just a nurse for a broken bone anymore. She had become the quiet, steady heartbeat of my home. She anticipated my needs before I was even aware of them myself. A glass of iced tea would appear at my elbow just as the Texas sun reached its peak. The book I'd been meaning to read would be on my nightstand with a bookmark in place. She even took over tending my roses, her touch as delicate and knowing as my own. The garden thrived under her care. Emily's charm wasn't limited to the confines of my house. She conquered Wimberley. When my book club ladies came over for our Tuesday meeting, Emily served them her famous lemon poppy seed cake and refilled their teacups with a silent grace. "Oh, Margaret, you are just so lucky," Beatrice Whitfield, a notorious town gossip, declared. "Where did you find such a treasure?" "She's an absolute saint," another added, watching as Emily helped me adjust the cushion behind my back. I felt a swell of pride, a sense of vindication against Mark's unfounded suspicions. "She was a gift from Pastor John," I said, beaming. At church on Sunday, she was a picture of devotion, sitting beside me in the pew, her clear voice rising with the hymns. She knew every elderly member by name, always stopping to ask about a grandchild or a troublesome hip. Pastor John would watch her with a benevolent smile, as if looking upon his finest work. She was weaving herself into the fabric of my life and my town, and every thread was perfect. She became my confidant. The loneliness that had been a physical ache in my chest began to dissolve in the warmth of her companionship. I found myself telling her stories I hadn't shared with anyone, not even my own children. Silly stories about my first date with Robert, my secret fears about getting older. She would listen, her blue eyes full of empathy, making me feel seen and heard in a way I hadn't realized I was missing. "Mark worries too much," I confided in her one evening as we sat on the porch, watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance. Emily placed a comforting hand on my arm. Her touch was light as a feather. "He loves you, Mrs. Hale. It's only natural for a son to be protective. But sometimes, people who are trained to see the bad in the world have trouble recognizing simple goodness when it's right in front of them." Her words were like a balm to the small, lingering wound Mark's accusations had left. She understood. She wasn't offended. She was gracious. It solidified my belief. My son, the brilliant lawyer, was blind. He couldn't see the pure heart that was so obvious to me and everyone else in Wimberley. In those honeyed days, my world, which had shrunk to the four walls of my silent house, began to expand again. Life was no longer a thing to be endured, but something to be savored. Each morning was a gift, each slice of homemade cake a small celebration. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt truly, deeply safe. I had let an angel into my home, and she had healed not just my broken wrist, but my lonely heart. I fell asleep each night with a grateful prayer on my lips, completely unaware that the angel watching over me was simply waiting for the perfect moment to make sure I never woke up again. The first sign that something was amiss wasn't a sudden shock, but a slow, creeping fog. About 2 months into Emily's tenure as my live-in angel, I began to feel a profound and unshakable exhaustion. It was more than the usual aches and pains of a 76-year-old body. This was a weariness of the bone, a fuzziness that settled behind my eyes and made the world seem slightly out of focus. Some days, I'd struggle to get out of bed, the effort feeling as monumental as climbing a mountain. Other afternoons, I'd drift off in my armchair in the middle of a sentence, only to wake up an hour later with a dry mouth and a muddled head, the book I was reading having slipped to the floor. When I mentioned it to Emily, she was the picture of concern. "Oh, Mrs. Hale, you're still recovering," she'd say, fluffing my pillows. "Your body used a lot of energy to mend that wrist. It's perfectly normal to feel tired. The best thing for you is rest." Another time, after a particularly dizzy spell followed my morning pills, she said, "It's likely your blood pressure medication. Sometimes it can take a while for your body to adjust." She would say it with such authority, such gentle confidence, that my worries would dissolve. She was so knowledgeable. Of course, she was right. I was just being a fretful old woman. But the fog persisted. It was subtle, but it was chipping away at me, making me feel less like myself and more like a spectator in my own life. Emily's presence grew even more essential. She managed everything, from my meals to my appointments, with a seamless efficiency that I was increasingly grateful for as my own energy waned. I was becoming more and more dependent on her, and in my hazy state, it felt like a comfort. The first real crack in her perfect facade appeared on a Thursday. It was the day I balanced my checkbook and reviewed my credit card statement, a ritual I'd inherited from my meticulously organized Robert. I sat at his old mahogany desk, the familiar scent of wood polish and old paper a small comfort. I put on my reading glasses and opened the envelope. I scanned the list of charges. The grocery store, the pharmacy, the electric company. All normal. And then I saw it. A charge for $850 from a store called Boutique Fantasia in Austin. I'd never heard of it. My heart gave a little flutter of confusion. Below that, another charge, $1,200 from an online retailer, Luxe Handbags. I took off my glasses and rubbed my eyes. This had to be a mistake. Fraud. Someone must have stolen my card number. My shopping excursions consisted of trips to H-E-B for groceries and the local nursery for rose fertilizer. The last handbag I bought was a sensible leather tote from Dillard's 5 years ago. I was about to call the bank when Emily entered the room, carrying a tray with my afternoon tea and a biscuit. "Everything all right, Mrs. Hale? You look like you've seen a ghost." My first instinct was to hide the paper, which was a strange reaction. Why would I hide it from Emily? But then I thought, no, she could help. She was practical. She'd know what to do. "Emily, dear," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "Look at this. Someone has been using my credit card. There are thousands of dollars in charges here that I didn't make." She set the tray down and leaned over my shoulder. She scanned the statement, her brow furrowing in a perfect imitation of shared distress. Then came a small gasp of outrage. "Oh my goodness, that's awful," she exclaimed, her hand flying to her chest. "These companies, they are so careless with people's information, and to think they would target a senior citizen. It's despicable." She took charge immediately. "Don't you worry about a thing. I'll handle this. I will call the bank's fraud department right now and read them the riot act. We will get every single penny back." I felt a wave of relief. She was so capable. Her anger on my behalf felt so genuine. It extinguished my own panic. I handed her the phone and watched as she competently navigated the automated menus of the bank, speaking with a firm, authoritative tone to the representative. A few minutes later, she hung up, her face a triumphant smile. "It's all taken care of," she announced. "They've frozen the account and are launching an investigation. They said it was likely a skimming device at a gas station. The charges will be reversed within 10 business days." "Oh, thank you, Emily," I breathed. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "It's my pleasure to protect you," she said, patting my shoulder. Then she paused, tapping her chin thoughtfully. "You know, Mrs. Hale, this whole incident has me thinking. It's such a hassle for you to deal with bills and payments, especially when you should be resting. And what if there's an emergency? A plumber needs to be paid, or the lawn service sends an unexpected bill." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "To make things easier and safer, perhaps you could sign a few checks for me, but leave the amount and payee line blank. That way, if a bill comes due while you're napping or not feeling well, I can just take care of it for you instantly, without bothering you. It would just be for emergencies and regular household expenses, of course." My mind, still foggy from my earlier nap and rattled by the credit card scare, struggled to process her logic. It sounded sensible. It sounded like she was trying to help, to make my life easier. But a small, cold voice, one that sounded a lot like my son Mark, whispered in the back of my head, "Never sign a blank check." I must have hesitated because Emily's smile became even sweeter, tinged with a hint of pity. "Of course, if you don't trust me, I understand," she said softly, her eyes welling up with crocodile tears. "No, no, dear. Of course I trust you," I said quickly, ashamed of my momentary doubt. She had just saved me from a financial nightmare. How could I question her intentions? "You're right. It's a very practical idea." I pulled my checkbook from the drawer, and with a hand that was not entirely steady, I signed my name, Margaret Hale, on the signature line of 3 perfectly blank checks. She took them from me, tucking them neatly into her apron pocket. "Thank you for trusting me," she said, her brilliant smile back in place. "You won't regret it." That night, as I lay in bed, the exhaustion felt heavier than ever. Emily's explanation had been perfect. Her solution had been practical. But I couldn't shake a tiny, cold splinter of unease that had lodged itself deep in my heart. The pieces all fit together perfectly, but something about the picture still felt wrong. The splinter of unease I'd felt after signing those checks didn't go away. Instead, it festered. The tranquility of the past few months evaporated, replaced by a low, humming anxiety that followed me from room to room. I started watching Emily, not as my savior, but with a new, critical eye. I noticed things I hadn't before. How her smile, as bright as it was, never seemed to change, like a mask she wore for every occasion. How she would end a phone call in the other room, her voice low and businesslike, only to enter my presence with her usual syrupy sweetness. The fog in my head was getting worse, and with it came a terrifying thought. Was the fogginess real? Or was I just an old woman losing her mind? I felt trapped in my own home, in my own head, and utterly alone. I couldn't call Mark. The shame was too great. Admitting my fears would mean admitting he was right, and my pride, stubborn and old as it was, wouldn't allow it. It would also send him into a 5-alarm panic, and I didn't have any real proof, just feelings. A cold dread in the pit of my stomach. There was only one other person I could turn to. Helen Brooks. Helen and I had been friends for nearly 50 years. We'd met when our children were in kindergarten and had seen each other through everything since. Scraped knees, teenage heartbreaks, weddings, and eventually the shared quiet grief of widowhood. Helen was a retired RN, a registered nurse, with a mind as sharp as a scalpel and a no-nonsense attitude that I desperately needed. She lived just a few blocks away, and our daily phone calls were as much a part of my routine as my morning coffee. But I hadn't been completely honest with her lately. I had painted a rosy picture of my life with Emily, partly because I wanted to believe it myself. Finally, I couldn't bear the weight of my secret any longer. I waited until Emily had gone out for groceries. My hand trembled as I dialed Helen's number. "Margaret, is everything all right? You sound shaky." She knew my voice better than I did. Tears I didn't know I'd been holding back began to well in my eyes. "Oh, Helen," I began, and then the whole story came tumbling out. The relentless exhaustion, the mental fog, the strange credit card charges, Emily's flawless explanation, and the final shameful detail of the blank checks. I expected her to scold me. Instead, the line was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice wasn't judgmental, it was clinical. It was the voice of Helen the nurse. "Margaret, tell me exactly what medications she gives you each morning. The names, the dosages if you know them." I listed them off. "And the fogginess?" she continued. "Does it get worse after you take them?" I thought back. "Yes," I whispered, the realization dawning on me. "About an hour after, I always feel like I need a nap." "And these checks," she said, her voice tight with anger. "Margaret, you call the bank right now and put a stop payment on them. Tell them your checkbook was stolen. Do it the second we hang up." Her calm, decisive commands cut through my panic. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was going crazy. I felt validated. "What do you think is happening, Helen?" I asked, my voice small. "I think your angel has a tarnished halo," she said grimly. "I don't have proof of anything yet, but a nurse's gut is rarely wrong, just like a lawyer's. Let me make a few calls. You sit tight and for God's sake, don't eat any more of her chicken soup. Stick to prepackaged foods if you can." Hanging up the phone, I felt a strange mix of terror and relief. The threat felt more real than ever, but now I wasn't alone in facing it. 2 days passed. They were the longest 2 days of my life. I feigned a stomach bug to avoid Emily's cooking and tried to act normal, a task that required every ounce of my dwindling strength. Every time she smiled at me, my skin crawled. On the 3rd day, Helen called back. "Are you alone?" she asked, her voice low. "Yes, she's in the garden." "Okay, listen to me carefully," Helen began. I started by calling a few old friends from my hospital days who live over in San Marcos. I asked if they'd ever heard of a young, blonde caregiver named Emily Carter, who was exceptionally good with the elderly. The name rang a bell for one of them. My heart hammered against my ribs. Emily worked for a family there about a year ago. She cared for a retired Army colonel named George Abernathy, a widower. He was recovering from a hip replacement, much like you with your wrist. "What happened to him?" I breathed. Helen's voice dropped even lower. "He died, Margaret. The official cause was a heart attack in his sleep. Everyone said it was a peaceful end. He'd been declining, so it wasn't a total shock." "Oh," I said, a wave of disappointment washing over me. "It was a dead end." "Don't owe me yet," Helen snapped. "I got the number for his son, Daniel Abernathy. The family is divided. I spoke to his daughter first. She couldn't sing Emily's praises enough, said she was a blessing, a saint, who made her father's last months comfortable." My blood ran cold. It was the same language, the same script. "But then," Helen continued, her voice grim, "I spoke to the son, Daniel. He's a veteran himself, like his father. He's suspicious. He told me his dad was tough as nails, recovering well from the surgery, and then Emily showed up. Within a month, he was listless, confused, and weak. Daniel argued with his sister about it, but she accused him of being cold and unfeeling. She said Emily was just making their father comfortable. I clutched the phone, my knuckles white, confused, weak. It was happening to me. And then Daniel told me the final piece, Helen said, her voice heavy with the weight of her words. After the funeral, he noticed a few things missing from his father's study. Nothing big enough to cause a family war over, just odd. A collection of valuable first edition books, and his father's Purple Heart medal from Vietnam. The daughter insisted their father must have given them away or misplaced them in his confusion. Daniel never believed it. He thinks Emily took them, but he had no proof, and his own sister was her biggest defender. The room began to spin. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't just my imagination. This was a pattern, a blueprint. Find a vulnerable senior, isolate them from suspicious family members, medicate them into confusion, plunder their assets, and then what? A peaceful end? The fog that had clouded my mind for weeks was gone, burned away by the cold, sharp certainty of terror. This woman, this angel who was at this very moment humming a hymn while tending my roses, was not here to care for me. She was here to replace me. Terror is a powerful stimulant. The mental fog that had kept me passive and pliable for weeks was now replaced by a chilling, razor-sharp clarity. Every detail in my own home, once a source of comfort, now seemed menacing. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like a countdown. The sweet, floral scent of the air freshener Emily used felt cloying and poisonous. And her smile, that constant, beatific smile, was the most terrifying thing of all. It was the beautiful, placid surface of a deep, dark lake, and I knew that just beneath it, monsters were stirring. Helen and I spoke in hushed tones, like conspirators planning a coup. Our strategy had two parts: gather undeniable proof, and do it without letting the monster know she was being watched. "She's clever, Margaret," Helen warned me over the phone while Emily was out on one of her mysterious errands. "You can't let your guard down for a second. We need more than just a dead man's story and a son's suspicions. We need something solid." The first piece of our plan came from Helen's surprisingly tech-savvy mind. "My grandson showed me how to use the voice recorder on my old smartphone," she explained. "It's simple. You just have to hide it somewhere she won't find it. Under a cushion, behind a curtain, somewhere she talks on the phone." Emily often took her personal calls in the sunroom, pacing back and forth among the ferns, her voice a low murmur. That afternoon, feigning a deep nap, I watched her through slitted eyelids as she left the house. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I shuffled into the sunroom. My hands, frail and spotted with age, trembled as I took the old smartphone Helen had slipped me and tucked it deep between the cushions of the wicker sofa. I turned on the recording app, the tiny red dot, a beacon of our rebellion, and covered it with a throw pillow. Getting back to my armchair felt like completing a marathon. I was just settling in, my breath coming in ragged gasps, when Emily returned, humming. For 2 days, the phone lay dormant, recording nothing but hours of silence. I was beginning to lose hope. Then, on the third afternoon, it happened. I was in the kitchen, pretending to read the newspaper, while Emily was in the sunroom. The low murmur of her voice started, and I strained my ears. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was different. The usual melodic sweetness was gone, replaced by something flat, hard, and impatient. After she hung up and left the room, I retrieved the phone with trembling fingers. I huddled in my bedroom, the door locked, and played the recording. Her voice, stripped of all its warmth, was almost unrecognizable. "No, the trust hasn't been processed yet. I know, but you can't rush these things. It has to look natural," she said, her voice sharp. A pause. "Look, she's tougher than Abernathy was. The dosage needs to be just right. Too much, too soon, and the son, the lawyer, will be all over it. He's already suspicious. Yes, of course, I have the checks. Just be patient. It's a big one. It will be worth the wait." Tougher than Abernathy was. The words echoed in the silent room. I felt a cold dread wash over me, so intense I had to sit on the edge of the bed. This wasn't just theft. It was a practiced methodical hunt. Abernathy was just the one before me. How many others had there been? The second piece of evidence was the medication itself. Every morning, Emily would bring me a small cup with my pills. The white one for my blood pressure, the pink one for my heart, and a small, pale blue capsule that she said was a vitamin supplement for bone health that the doctor had recommended. I had never seen the bottle. She always prepared the cup in the kitchen and brought it to me. Helen had been adamant. "We need one of those blue pills, Margaret. A police lab can analyze it." Getting one felt impossible. She watched me like a hawk when I took my medication. But Helen, ever the nurse, had a plan. "The next time she gives them to you, pretend you're having a coughing fit as you swallow them. Let one of the pills fall from your mouth. With luck, you can palm it." The next morning, my hands were slick with sweat. Emily stood before me, holding the cup and the glass of water, her smile fixed in place. I took the pills into my mouth, and as I drank the water, I forced a series of ragged, wet coughs. It felt horribly fake, but Emily just looked on with mild annoyance. As I coughed, I let the small blue capsule slip from my lips into the palm of my hand, which was hidden in the folds of my housecoat. "Oh dear me," I rasped, wiping my mouth with a napkin. "Went down the wrong pipe." "Just be more careful," she said, her voice lacking its usual sympathy. She was losing patience. The mask was slipping. Later that day, Helen came to visit, bringing a batch of her famous oatmeal raisin cookies as a pretext. While Emily was in the kitchen making tea, I slipped the tiny blue capsule, wrapped in a piece of tissue, into Helen's hand. Her fingers closed around it, a silent promise. The final piece was visual. I knew I needed to find where she kept her stash of these vitamins. I watched her movements, her routines. I noticed she always kept her large handbag on the floor of the coat closet in the hallway. She never seemed to go anywhere without it. My chance came when she was outside, having a long, animated conversation on her cell phone by the rose bushes. My mobility was still limited, but fueled by adrenaline, I moved faster than I had in years. I crept to the closet, my heart in my throat, and opened the door. Her bag was there. Unzipping it felt like defusing a bomb. Inside, past her wallet and keys, was a smaller zippered pouch. I opened it. There they were. Not one prescription bottle, but 3. All with the labels carefully peeled off, and inside each, hundreds of the same small pale blue capsules. This wasn't a prescription, it was a supply. I didn't dare take the bottles, but I had the old smartphone. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold it steady, but I managed to take several clear, damning photographs. I zipped the bag shut, placed it exactly as I had found it, and made it back to my chair, just as her footsteps sounded on the porch. That evening, Helen came over again. We sat in my bedroom, the door locked, and laid out our spoils. A chilling audio recording of a predator discussing her hunt. A tiny blue pill, the potential murder weapon, and photographs of a secret, lethal supply. We looked at each other. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but now it was mixed with something else, a fierce, burning resolve. We were not 2 frail old women. We were survivors, and we had the evidence to prove it. Armed with our evidence, Helen went to the Wimberley police station the next morning. It was a small, unassuming brick building that handled little more than the occasional traffic ticket or teenage prank. Helen, with her sensible shoes and determined expression, marched in there expecting justice. What she got was a pat on the head. She laid it all out for Police Chief Miller, a man with a booming belly and a face that was permanently flushed from the Texas heat. She presented the Abernathy story, the suspicious medication, the photos, and the chilling audio recording. She expected him to be shocked, to take action immediately. Instead, he listened with a weary, patronizing patience. "Helen," he said when she was finished, his voice dripping with condescension, "you and Margaret have been friends a long time. You're good people. But you're getting on in years. Don't you think maybe you're letting your imaginations run away with you?" He explained away every piece of our carefully gathered proof. The Abernathy case, a grieving son looking for someone to blame. The photos of the pill bottles, Emily probably bought supplements in bulk to save money. The audio recording? It's muffled, Helen. She could be talking about anything. A business deal, helping an old person with their estate planning so they can go peacefully without financial worries. He twisted every sinister word into a benign one. "And this pill," he said, holding up the tiny blue capsule Helen had given him. "It's probably just a sleeping aid. Maybe Margaret's more forgetful than she realizes, and this Emily girl is just trying to help her get some rest. The most infuriating part was his defense of Emily. I know that girl, he said, leaning back in his squeaky chair. Emily Carter is a pillar of our community. She volunteers at the church bake sale every month. She sings in the choir. My own mother thinks she's an angel. You're asking me to believe that this sweet young woman is some kind of serial poisoner? He let out a short, barking laugh, as if it were the most ridiculous thing he'd ever heard. Helen left the station, her face a mask of cold fury. He treated me like a dotty old fool, she seethed over the phone to me later. He didn't file a report. He didn't even keep the pill for evidence. He handed it back to me and told me to get a good night's sleep. Despair washed over me, cold and suffocating. The one institution that was supposed to protect us, the law, was laughing at us. Chief Miller didn't see two citizens reporting a potential crime. He saw two senile old women spinning fantasies. Emily's perfect reputation, the very thing she used as her shield, was impenetrable. She had charmed the whole town, including the chief of police. We were trapped. That night, my fear curdled into a new, terrifying shape. Emily knew. I don't know how, but she knew something had shifted. Maybe she noticed the way I flinched when she touched my arm. Maybe she saw the look in Helen's eyes when she'd last visited. Her mask of sweetness was still in place, but underneath I could feel a cold, simmering impatience. She started watching me more closely, her blue eyes lingering on me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. There was only one move left to make, the one I had resisted out of pride and shame. I had to call Mark. I waited until the dead of night when Emily was asleep in her room down the hall. I locked my bedroom door, my hand shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. I sat on my bed, the phone pressed to my ear, and when he answered, his voice thick with sleep, I broke down. You were right, I sobbed, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Mark, you were right about everything. The initial response was what I'd expected. A flash of anger, the sharp sting of an "I told you so." Damn it, Mom. I warned you, he said, his voice a low growl of frustration. I knew it. I knew something was wrong with her. But the anger lasted only a moment, burned away by the sheer terror in my voice. He immediately shifted from angry son to protective lawyer. Okay, Mom. Okay, calm down. Tell me everything. Don't leave out a single detail. For the next hour, I recounted the entire nightmare. I told him about Helen's investigation, the Abernathy family, the audio recording, the pills, the photos, and Chief Miller's humiliating dismissal. I told him how Emily was watching me now, how I was afraid to sleep in my own house. He listened in absolute silence. When I was done, there was no more anger in his voice. There was only ice. Stay in your room. Keep the door locked, he commanded, his voice the one he used in a courtroom. Cold, precise, and radiating an authority that could not be questioned. Do not eat or drink anything she gives you. If you have to, pretend to be asleep. I'm on my way. But Mark, it's a 4-hour drive. I'm already getting dressed, Mom. I'll be there before dawn. Now I'm going to make a phone call. He didn't call Chief Miller. Mark knew that going through the front door of a corrupt or incompetent local police department was useless. He went over his head. Mark's law firm in Houston was a powerful one, and he had connections. He called the Texas Rangers. He didn't present it as a frantic son worried about his mother. He presented it as a lawyer laying out a case. He was calm, professional, and methodical. He explained the evidence Helen had gathered, highlighting the clear pattern of behavior. He described the suspicious medication and my deteriorating health. Most importantly, he cited Chief Miller's refusal to investigate as a dereliction of duty, suggesting a potential cover-up, or at the very least, gross negligence that was actively endangering a citizen's life. He knew the right buttons to push, the right language to use. He wasn't a hysterical old woman. He was an officer of the court. He wasn't asking for a favor. He was demanding action. He sent them the audio file and the photographs as he spoke. The response from the Texas Rangers was immediate. They promised to contact the Hays County Sheriff's Department, a jurisdiction above Wimberley's small-town police force, and have them initiate a discreet wellness check and surveillance. When Mark called me back to tell me what he'd done, I felt the first glimmer of hope since Helen had walked out of that police station. Mark's cynicism, his suspicious nature, the very qualities I had once dismissed, had become my lifeline. My son, whom I had ignored and scolded, was now my fierce, brilliant protector. I spent the rest of the night sitting in a chair I had wedged against my bedroom door, listening to the house creak and groan, my eyes wide in the darkness. I was no longer a victim waiting for the axe to fall. I was part of a trap. And the hunters were on their way. The Texas sky has a flair for the dramatic. That afternoon it began to put on a show. The brilliant blue faded to a bruised, sickly purple. The wind, which had been a gentle breeze, began to whip through the cypress trees with a low, mournful howl. A storm was coming, a big one. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of rain and ozone, and a tense, electric stillness settled over Wimberley. It was a perfect reflection of the atmosphere inside my house. Emily felt it too. The net was closing, and she was starting to sense the tightening threads. Her pretense of calm was fraying at the edges. I saw her pacing, peering out the windows, her gaze lingering on a nondescript sedan parked a block away, a car that hadn't been there yesterday. She'd stopped humming her hymns. The silence she left in her wake was more terrifying than any noise. Around 7 o'clock, the sky opened up. Rain lashed against the windows in blinding sheets, and the first rumble of thunder shook the house to its foundations. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging us into a disorienting darkness, illuminated only by the jagged, momentary flashes of lightning. "Oh dear," Emily's voice came out of the gloom, laced with a false sweetness that didn't hide the tension beneath. "A power outage. Don't you worry, Mrs. Hale. I'll get the emergency candles. We'll be cozy in here." She returned a few moments later, her face an eerie, dancing mask in the candlelight. She was holding a mug. The steam rising from it carried a cloying, herbal scent I didn't recognize. "I made you some chamomile tea," she said, her voice a soft purr. "To help you sleep. The thunder can be so frightening. This will help you rest right through it." My heart seized in my chest. This was it. This was the moment. I could see it in her eyes, which were no longer the color of a summer sky, but of a stormy sea. The patience was gone. The lawyer's son was on his way. The police were sniffing around. It was time to finish the job. "No, thank you, dear," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not tired." "Nonsense," she chirped, advancing on me. "You've been so agitated. A good deep sleep is just what the doctor ordered." She brought the mug closer. "Just drink up. It will be over before you know it." The finality in her voice was unmistakable. It will be over. Panic, cold and absolute, shot through me. I shrank back in my armchair, my body trembling uncontrollably. "I don't want it, Emily." Her face transformed. The angelic mask didn't just slip, it shattered. Her smile vanished, replaced by a snarl of pure venomous frustration. "You foolish old woman," she hissed, her voice a low growl. "After everything I've done for you, now you will drink this tea." She lunged, grabbing my chin with one hand, forcing my head back against the chair. The rim of the hot mud pressed against my lips. I twisted my head, the bitter-smelling liquid splashing onto my chin and neck. With my free hand, I clawed at her arm, a pathetic, desperate gesture. My fingers fumbled at my neck, searching, and then they found it. The small plastic button of my medical alert pendant, hidden beneath the collar of my nightgown. As she tried to force the mug back to my lips, I squeezed my eyes shut and pressed that button with all my remaining strength. A moment later, a metallic voice squawked from the base unit in the kitchen. "Emergency signal received. Are you all right, Mrs. Hale?" Emily froze, her eyes wide with fury. She threw the mug to the floor, where it shattered, the dark liquid pooling on the rug. "What did you do?" she shrieked. Before I could answer, a frantic, pounding rhythm started at the front door. It wasn't the police. It was faster, more urgent. It was Helen. Margaret, are you in there?" Helen's voice, sharp with panic, cut through the roar of the storm. Emily shot a look at me, then at the door, her mind racing. She couldn't have a witness. She dragged me out of the chair, her fingers digging into my arm like talons. "Not a word," she whispered, her breath hot and sour against my ear. She pulled me toward the hallway, away from the front door. But Helen was not to be deterred. We heard a loud crack, the sound of the old door frame splintering, and then the door flew open. Helen stood there, silhouetted against the storm, soaking wet and holding a heavy iron tire iron. "Get away from her, you bitch," Helen snarled, advancing into the house. She looked less like a retired nurse and more like a warrior goddess. Emily, seeing her plan collapse, shoved me aside. I stumbled and fell against the wall. She turned and ran, not for the back door, but for her purse, which was still in the coat closet. She was going for the checks, for the only thing she could still salvage. Just as her fingers closed around the bag, the night exploded with light. Not lightning, but the flashing red and blue of police cars flooding the street. The front door, already broken by Helen, was thrown open with a crash, and 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies poured in, guns drawn. "Police, don't move," they yelled. Emily spun around, trapped. Her face was a terrifying canvas of pure rage. In her hand wasn't the checkbook. It was a syringe, one she must have grabbed from the bag, filled with a clear liquid. It was her backup plan. The quick, silent, untraceable method. She stared at them, a cornered animal, her chest heaving. For a split second, I saw a flicker of the broken little girl she must have once been. Then it was gone, replaced by a cold, flat emptiness. "Drop it, now," one of the deputies commanded. Slowly, almost theatrically, Emily let the syringe slip from her fingers. It clattered onto the hardwood floor. The click of the handcuffs snapping around her wrists was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was louder than the thunder, louder than the rain, louder than the frantic beating of my own heart. It was the sound of the nightmare ending. They led her out, her face impassive, into the swirling rain and the flashing lights. The angel of Wimberley, exposed at last as the monster she was, disappeared into the storm. Helen rushed to my side, wrapping her strong arms around me, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself weep. The trial of Emily Carter was held not in Wimberley, but at the Hayes County Courthouse, a grand, imposing building of limestone and oak. Yet, it felt as if our entire small town had been packed into its solemn, wood-paneled courtroom. The pews were filled with familiar faces, a sea of confusion, betrayal, and morbid curiosity. I saw my book club ladies, Pastor John looking 10 years older, and even the police chief, Miller, avoiding everyone's gaze. They had all come to see the monster, but the woman sitting at the defendant's table didn't look like one. Emily was the picture of serene composure. Dressed in a simple, modest gray dress, her blonde hair pulled back neatly, she looked like a repentant saint. She would occasionally dab at her eyes with a handkerchief, but mostly she sat with her hands folded in her lap, her expression one of thoughtful, pious sorrow. It was a masterful performance, and I could see it was working. I could see the doubt flickering in the eyes of the jury. The prosecution, with Mark sitting at their table as a consultant, was methodical and devastating. They played the audio recording from the sunroom. Hearing Emily's cold, businesslike voice, discussing me as if I were a stock to be liquidated, sent a visible shudder through the courtroom. A toxicologist testified that the blue capsule contained a dangerously high, unprescribed dose of a potent sedative, which, when mixed with my heart medication, would have slowed my respiratory system to a complete stop. Daniel Abernathy took the stand, his voice thick with emotion as he recounted his father's unnaturally rapid decline and the disappearance of his cherished war medal. Then it was my turn. With Mark's hand on my shoulder for support, I walked slowly to the witness stand. My voice, frail but clear, did not waver as I told my story. I looked directly at Emily. For a moment, her mask of piety slipped. I saw a flash of pure cold hatred in her eyes before it was replaced again by sorrow. The defense attorney was slick. He tried to paint me and Helen as confused, lonely old women, prone to fantasy and paranoia. He portrayed Emily as a deeply compassionate soul who was simply trying to manage a difficult patient. He called Pastor John to the stand, who testified through gritted teeth about Emily's years of good works, his face a mask of shame and disbelief. But the real question, the one hanging in the air, was why? Why would this angel do these things? The answer, when it came, was more tragic and twisted than any of us could have imagined. The prosecution didn't call a witness. Instead, they submitted into evidence the journal of a young Emily Carter, found in a box at her apartment. A court-appointed psychologist read a key passage aloud. As his voice filled the courtroom, the scene he described came alive in my mind, a ghostly flashback painting a picture of the day the angel fell. Flashback, 10 years earlier. The room smelled of antiseptic and decay. Emily, barely 18, sat by her mother's bedside. The woman on the bed was a skeletal stranger, a hollowed-out version of the vibrant mother she remembered, Cancer had eaten her from the inside out, leaving nothing but pain. Her mother's breath was a ragged, wet rattle, each one a monumental effort. Her eyes, cloudy with morphine, fluttered open. "Baby," she rasped, her voice a dry whisper. "I'm here, Mama," Emily said, taking her mother's paper-thin hand. The woman tried to smile, but it was a grimace of agony. "It hurts so much," she cried, the tears leaving clean tracks on her sallow cheeks. "Every second. It's not living, Emily, it's just waiting in a house on fire." Her fingers tightened on Emily's hand, a sudden, surprising surge of strength. "You've always been my angel. Please, baby, be my angel now. Help me. Make it stop." The plea hung in the stale air. It was the one thing Emily had been dreading, the one thing she had been praying she would not hear. But now it was here. Her mother, her beloved mother, was begging for death. Emily looked at the array of pill bottles on the nightstand. She saw the lines of pain etched on her mother's face. In that moment, something inside her broke. The line between right and wrong, between mercy and murder, blurred and then vanished. All she could see was her mother's suffering. All she could feel was a desperate, all-consuming need to make it stop. Love, in its most twisted form, demanded action. She went to the kitchen. Her hands, moving with a strange, dreamlike certainty, crushed a handful of the strongest painkillers into a fine powder. She mixed it into a small bowl of her mother's favorite applesauce. When she returned to the bedside, her mother looked at her, her eyes lucid and full of a terrible, grateful understanding. "My angel," she whispered one last time. Emily fed her the applesauce, one spoonful at a time, her own tears mingling with the sweet pulp. She sat there for hours, holding her mother's hand, until the rattling breaths grew shallow, and then, finally, ceased. In the profound silence of that room, a monster was born from an act of love. She had eased her mother's suffering. She had been an angel of mercy. And in her shattered mind, she came to believe this was her true calling. The money, the valuables she took from the others later on, they weren't theft. They were a tribute, a payment she deserved for her sacred, merciful work. Returned to the courtroom, as the psychologist finished reading, a heavy, profound silence descended on the courtroom. The motive wasn't simple greed. It was something far more disturbing, a righteous, pathological belief in her own mercy, born from a trauma so deep it had poisoned her soul. I looked over at Emily. For the first time, a single, genuine tear traced a path down her cheek. She wasn't crying for me or for Mr. Abernathy or for the 7 other victims the investigation had now uncovered across the state. She was crying for her mother. She was crying for the girl she had been in that dark, sick room 10 years ago. The jury filed out, their faces grim. The town of Wimberley was no longer just looking at a calculating killer. They were looking at a ghost, the ghost of a heartbroken girl who had appointed herself an angel, only to become a messenger of death. It took the jury less than 2 hours. When they filed back into the courtroom, their faces were solemn and resolute. I gripped Helen's hand on one side and Mark's on the other, my own heart a steady, determined drumbeat. I was no longer the frail, frightened woman who had pressed that panic button in the dark. I was a survivor, here to witness the final act of justice. The foreman, a stout man who ran the local hardware store, stood and cleared his throat. He did not look at Emily. He looked at me. On the charge of attempted murder of Margaret Hale, we the jury find the defendant Emily Carter guilty. A collective gasp, then a wave of quiet sobs and relieved sighs washed through the courtroom. He continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. On the 8 charges of first-degree murder, we find the defendant guilty. Guilty. 8 times over. George Abernathy and 7 others, 7 lonely, trusting souls from towns across central Texas whose peaceful ends had finally been revealed for what they were. The room swam before my eyes. It wasn't just my victory, it was theirs. The sentencing was swift. Given the calculated, predatory nature of her crimes, the judge showed no leniency. Emily Carter was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Throughout it all, she showed no emotion. The mask of piety was gone, replaced by a chilling, vacant emptiness. As they led her away in chains, she was no longer an angel or a monster. She was just a ghost, a hollow shell, forever trapped in the prison of a memory from 10 years ago. Wimberley was rocked to its core. The story was headline news across Texas. Our small town, once a haven of trust and community, was now famous for harboring a serial killer. The shame was palpable. Pastor John gave a tearful sermon, not of fire and brimstone, but of forgiveness and the failure of his own judgment. He asked the congregation to pray for the victims, and also for Emily, the lost sheep who had become a wolf. The town had to look in the mirror and confront the uncomfortable truth that their blind trust had made them unwitting accomplices to Emily's deception. They had handed her a shield of respectability, and she had used it as a weapon. My children, my fractured little family, began the slow process of healing. Linda flew down from Dallas the day after the verdict. The moment she saw me, she collapsed into my arms, her body shaking with gut-wrenching sobs. "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry," she wept, her words muffled against my shoulder. "I brought her here. I put you in danger. It's all my fault." I held her tight, stroking her hair as I had when she was a little girl with a scraped knee. "No," I said, my voice firm and clear. "You listened to the advice of a man of God. You acted out of love and concern. You were deceived, Linda, just as I was. Just as this whole town was. The guilt for this belongs to only one person, and she will spend the rest of her life paying for it. This guilt is not yours to carry." I felt the tension in her body release, as if I had lifted a physical weight from her shoulders. We talked for hours, really talked, for the first time in years. She made a promise, not just to me but to herself, to be more present, to not let the busyness of life overshadow what was truly important. A month later, her company approved her request to work remotely 2 days a week, and she started spending long weekends with me, not as a caregiver, but as a daughter. My relationship with Mark was transformed. The tension that had always existed between my trusting nature and his suspicious one was gone, replaced by a deep, profound respect. He became my steadfast protector, taking over my finances with the meticulous eye of a lawyer and the gentle hand of a loving son. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch, I finally said the words that needed to be said. "I'm so sorry, Mark. I didn't listen to you. You were right from the very beginning." He took my hand. "You have a good heart, Mom. You see the best in people. That's not a flaw, but the world is full of people who see that as an opportunity." He smiled a rare, warm smile. "From now on, you have me to be your cynic." And then there was Helen. Our friendship, already a bedrock of my life, was now forged in fire. We were no longer just two widows who played bridge and discussed books. We were comrades in arms, the two old ladies who had faced down a monster and won. We didn't talk about the ordeal often, but there was a new depth to our bond, an unspoken understanding that ran deeper than words. Life began to return to a new kind of normal, but I was not the same Margaret Hale. The naive, trusting school teacher was gone forever. In her place was a survivor, and I knew my story could not end with the click of a prison cell door. I had been given a second chance, and I had to use it. It started with a letter I received from a woman in San Antonio. She had read about the trial. She wrote to tell me about her own father, who had recently hired a new caregiver who seemed too good to be true. My story had been the red flag she needed. She investigated and found the woman had a history of petty theft from elderly clients. She had fired her, and she was writing to thank me for, as she put it, saving my father's life. Reading that letter, I knew what I had to do. My silence would be a betrayal of my survival. My first speech was at a senior community center in a neighboring town. My knees knocked and my voice trembled as I stepped up to the small podium. But then I looked out at the faces in the audience. Men and women my age with kind eyes and trusting hearts, all potential victims. And my fear was replaced by a fierce sense of purpose. My teacher's voice returned. "My name is Margaret Hale, and I am here to tell you a story," I began. "It is a story about a wolf who came to my door dressed as an angel." Over the next year, I became an accidental activist. I traveled to community centers, church groups, and town halls all over the state. I told my story, not for sympathy, but as a lesson. I wasn't spreading fear. I was teaching awareness. The people who prey on us, I would tell them, my voice ringing with a strength I never knew I possessed. They rely on our generation's good manners. They know we don't want to be a bother. They know we feel rude questioning someone who seems so kind. They use our decency against us. I am here today to tell you that it is time to be a bother. It is time to ask the hard questions. It is time to trust that little voice in your head, that gut feeling that tells you something is wrong. I taught them the red flags. The caregiver who tries to isolate you from your family, the one who handles your mail and your finances with a little too much enthusiasm, the one who is a little too perfect. Trust but verify became my mantra. Check references yourself. Don't just take the word of a friend or even a pastor. You do a real background check and never ever sign a blank check. I am 77 years old now. My little house in Wimberley is no longer silent. It's filled with Linda's laughter on the weekends and Mark's steadying presence. My roses are blooming more beautifully than ever. But my life is no longer confined to my garden. I have found a new purpose, a new classroom. I am still Margaret Hale, the teacher. But now my lesson is survival. I am the voice that whispers a warning in the ear of the trusting, a shield for the vulnerable. Emily Carter tried to silence me, to erase me from the world. Instead, she gave me a voice louder than I could have ever imagined, and I will use it until the very end. Margaret's story is a harrowing one, but it is also a story of incredible strength, resilience, and the power of community when we finally open our eyes. It's a chilling reminder that we must protect the ones we love, not just from the monsters we can see, but from the angels we can't. Thank you for joining me here today on Voices of Auntie Sandra. If this story moved you, or if you know someone who needs to hear this message, please take a moment to like this video and share it with your friends and family. Your support helps these important stories reach the people who need them most. And of course, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that notification bell so you won't miss another tale. I value each and every one of you, and I love hearing from you. So please leave a comment below with your thoughts. Stay safe, trust your instincts, and always, always look out for one another. Until next time.